What happens when enormous talent, fame, money, and easy access to alcohol collide? For some of Britain's greatest screen stars, the result was devastating. Careers weakened, marriages fractured, productions became difficult, and once powerful performers watched their health deteriorate. Some escaped and rebuilt their lives. Others never recovered. These famous British stars whose drinking seriously damaged their careers, bodies, reputations, relationships, or futures, revealing a side of classic Hollywood that glamorous studio photographs rarely showed. If you enjoy the hidden side of classic Hollywood, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Number 1. Richard Burton. Few actors ever possessed a voice like Richard Burton. Deep, intelligent, romantic, and slightly dangerous, it could make Shakespeare sound conversational and ordinary dialogue sound monumental. By the early 1960s, the Welsh actor had moved far beyond respected theatre work and become an international movie star. Cleopatra then changed everything. His relationship with Elizabeth Taylor became one of the most photographed romances in entertainment history, while their marriages, arguments, separations, reconciliations, and expensive lifestyle filled newspapers around the world. Behind the glamour, however, Burton's drinking grew increasingly serious. His diaries reveal a man who understood exactly how much alcohol had become part of his daily existence. He could consume extraordinary quantities and still perform, which made the problem easier for the industry to tolerate. Yet the physical cost accumulated. His face changed, his health weakened, and the drinking legend sometimes threatened to overshadow the actor. That was especially tragic because the talent never vanished. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, Beckett, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf show why contemporaries considered him extraordinary. Even weaker later films contain flashes of the old power. Burton repeatedly tried to reduce his drinking, but years of excess had already taken a toll. He died in 1984 at only 58, leaving behind the uncomfortable question of how much greater his career might have been with more control. Number 2. Peter O'Toole. One movie turned a tall, relatively unknown British actor into a face the world could never forget. When Peter O'Toole appeared against the desert in Lawrence of Arabia, his sharp features, extraordinary eyes, and unpredictable energy looked almost unreal. The performance should have begun a perfectly controlled superstar career. Nothing about O'Toole was perfectly controlled. He belonged to a generation of British and Irish actors who treated long nights in pubs as almost an extension of acting school. Drinking stories became part of their mythology, repeated on chat shows until dangerous behavior sounded charming. O'Toole participated enthusiastically. At first, the stories were funny. Later, the physical consequences became impossible to ignore. During the 1970s, major health problems and surgery forced him to change how he lived. The remarkable part is that he survived long enough to rebuild. He returned to demanding roles and eventually accumulated 8 competitive Academy Award nominations without a win. The Lion in Winter, The Ruling Class, The Stuntman, and My Favorite Year proved that his early brilliance had not disappeared. O'Toole lived until 81 and acted into old age, making his story less terminal than several others here. Still, years of drinking permanently affected his health and public image. He deserved to be remembered primarily as a magnificent classical actor. Instead, the pub stories became almost as famous as the performances, showing how easily a lifestyle can become stronger than the work itself. If these stories are already changing how you see classic Hollywood, make sure you are subscribed. We uncover the careers, scandals, forgotten films, and private struggles that old publicity departments preferred to keep outside the frame. Number 3. Oliver Reed. Long before Gladiator introduced him to younger audiences, Oliver Reed had been one of Britain's most magnetic leading men. There was something dangerous about him even when he stood completely still. In Oliver, Women in Love, The Devils, The Three Musketeers, and The Trap, Reed showed that beneath the intimidating appearance was an intelligent and surprisingly sensitive performer. Then the drinking reputation grew until it became almost impossible to separate Oliver Reed the actor from Oliver Reed the legendary drinker. Television producers invited him partly because nobody knew what might happen. Newspapers repeated stories of marathon nights, outrageous behavior, and confrontational interviews. Reed sometimes encouraged that image because scandal kept his name in public conversation. For a while, the strategy worked. Eventually, however, the off-screen character began swallowing the career. Directors could admire his talent while worrying about reliability, and major dramatic opportunities became less frequent. By the 1980s and 1990s, he often appeared in projects far below the level of his strongest work. That was frustrating, because he could still be excellent. Ridley Scott recognized this when he cast him as Proximo in Gladiator. Reed brought dignity, humor, and authority to the role, suggesting a serious late-career revival. He never saw the finished film. During production in Malta in 1999, Reed became ill after an afternoon of drinking and died at 61. His final performance reminded audiences that underneath the notorious headlines had always been a formidable actor. Number 4. Elizabeth Taylor. Before becoming Hollywood royalty, Elizabeth Taylor was born in London to American parents and entered movies as a child. MGM soon transformed her into one of the most photographed women on earth. National Velvet, A Place in the Sun, Giant, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Butterfield 8, Cleopatra, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf carried her from child performer to serious dramatic star. Yet enormous fame brought pressures that polished studio portraits never showed. Taylor endured illnesses, repeated operations, chronic physical pain, difficult marriages, intense newspaper attention, and emotional upheaval. Alcohol and prescription medication gradually became part of that struggle. By the early 1980s, the situation was serious enough that she entered the Betty Ford Center. For a superstar of her magnitude, publicly seeking treatment was remarkable. Hollywood had long hidden addiction behind phrases such as exhaustion or rest. Taylor did something different. She acknowledged that she needed help. The decision could have destroyed the glamorous image that studios had spent decades constructing. Instead, it helped create another chapter. Taylor recovered, returned to work, and later became one of the most important celebrity activists during the AIDS crisis. Alcohol, therefore, did not permanently destroy her career, but it came dangerously close to destroying important parts of her health and private life. Her survival matters because it shows that the famous doomed star ending was never inevitable. Even someone surrounded by wealth, beauty, fame, and privilege sometimes needed to admit that those things were not enough. Number 5. Peter Lawford. For a time, Peter Lawford seemed to be living several Hollywood fantasies at once. He was handsome, British-born, under contract to MGM, friendly with Frank Sinatra, and married to Patricia Kennedy, sister of John F. Kennedy. He moved through movie studios, nightclubs, political circles, and wealthy parties as though every important door had been opened for him. During the 1940s and 1950s, films including Good News, Easter Parade, Little Women, Royal Wedding, and It Should Happen to You made him a dependable leading man. Then the Rat Pack brought another level of celebrity. Lawford appeared in Ocean's 11 alongside Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Joey Bishop, while his Kennedy connection made him socially valuable. But those relationships gradually fractured. Political tensions damaged his friendship with Sinatra, his marriage ended, and substantial film roles became less frequent. Alcohol and drug use grew increasingly serious. The elegant MGM performer slowly became known more for parties and famous friends than for acting. By the early 1980s, his body was under enormous strain. Lawford entered the Betty Ford Center and publicly acknowledged an alcohol problem, but years of damage were difficult to reverse. He died on Christmas Eve in 1984 at 61 after cardiac arrest, while suffering serious liver and kidney problems. His life had once looked protected by every advantage Hollywood could offer. Money, beauty, powerful friends, and social status could not protect him from dependency. Number 6. Robert Newton. Every exaggerated pirate voice saying "R" owes something to Robert Newton. His Long John Silver in Disney's Treasure Island became so influential that generations copied the rolling West Country delivery without knowing where it began. The man behind that playful image was living through something much darker. Newton possessed genuine dramatic ability and had already appeared in This Happy Breed, Odd Man Out, Oliver Twist, and other major productions. When focused, he could be charismatic, frightening, funny, and emotionally complicated. The difficulty was reliability. Alcoholism became increasingly serious as his career progressed, and producers never knew whether they would get the brilliant professional or someone physically damaged by the previous night. Hollywood tolerated the risk because Newton could still dominate a scene. His pirate became so popular that he returned to the role for television, creating a kind of professional immortality. His health lasted far less time. Years of heavy drinking weakened him, and he died in Beverly Hills in 1956 at only 50. The irony is extraordinary. Newton created a character associated with freedom, adventure, treasure, and laughter. Yet his own life became increasingly restricted by dependency. The colorful stories surrounding his drinking sometimes make the period sound romantic, but missed opportunities and declining health tell another story. Robert Newton did not lack talent. He lacked the stability needed to protect that talent for a full lifetime, and cinema lost decades of performances that might otherwise have followed. Number 7. Robert Shaw. Most viewers first notice the eyes. When Robert Shaw enters Jaws as Quint, he looks like a man who has already survived something the other characters cannot understand. Then comes the Indianapolis speech, and for several minutes the blockbuster becomes something darker. Shaw proves that beneath the rough fisherman was an actor of enormous dramatic power. His career had already established that. From Russia with Love, A Man for All Seasons, The Sting, Battle of Britain, and The Taking of Pelham 123 showed remarkable range, while he also wrote novels and plays. Alcohol nevertheless remained a long-running problem. Shaw came from a family marked by tragedy, and his father had struggled with drinking as well. His marriage to actress Mary Ura placed two highly talented people with serious personal problems in the same household. When Ura died in 1975, Shaw was devastated but continued working. Stories from film sets added to his reputation as a heavy drinker, including during Jaws, where conflicts and unpredictable behavior became part of the production's legend. Reducing Shaw to those stories would be unfair, because the talent was obvious whenever the camera rolled. In 1978, only 3 years after Ura's death, he collapsed in Ireland and died from a heart attack at 51. Alcohol was not officially the single cause of death, but heavy drinking had been a documented part of his adult life. His career ended at an age when many actors are just entering their richest period. Number 8. Claude Rains. Nothing about Claude Rains suggested disorder. His screen presence was built on intelligence, elegance, and control. In Casablanca, he could turn corruption into charm. In Notorious, he made fear look sophisticated. In The Invisible Man, even when audiences could barely see him, his voice controlled the picture. That polished image helped make Rains one of Hollywood's most respected British character stars. His private relationship with alcohol was far less controlled. Born in London in 1889, he overcame a difficult childhood and a pronounced speech problem before becoming a distinguished stage actor. Hollywood immediately recognized the value of his unusual voice. 4 Academy Award nominations followed, along with decades of roles as diplomats, villains, fathers, policemen, kings, and complicated authority figures. Unlike Oliver Reed, Rains did not build a public persona around drunken behavior. The problem was quieter. He remained professional enough that audiences could easily miss what was happening beyond the set. That is why his story matters. Dependency does not always announce itself through scandal. Sometimes a person remains successful while the physical damage develops privately for years. By the 1960s, Rains was aging and increasingly ill. He died in 1967 following an abdominal hemorrhage, with liver cirrhosis also associated with his final health problems. Hollywood knew him as a master of restraint. Yet intelligence, discipline, and professional respect could not make long-term alcohol damage harmless. Number 9. George Sanders. No actor ever sounded more naturally bored with humanity than George Sanders. His voice made insults feel luxurious. As Addison DeWitt in All About Eve, he created one of classic Hollywood's greatest cynics and won an Academy Award. Rebecca, Foreign Correspondent, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and many other films used the same elegant menace. The screen personality seemed untouchable. The real man became increasingly vulnerable. Sanders always possessed a pessimistic streak and joked about aging and death in ways that later became uncomfortable to revisit. During his later years, several losses arrived close together. His wife Benita Hume died. His brother Tom Conway experienced a devastating decline. Financial disappointments and weakening health followed. Drinking became heavier, Professional opportunities were changing too, as the polished villains Sanders played so well belonged increasingly to an older Hollywood style. He remained recognizable and even voiced Shere Khan in Disney's The Jungle Book, but his world was narrowing. Alcohol alone did not explain his final decline. Depression, grief, aging, financial problems, and illness mattered as well. Still, heavy drinking became another damaging element in those years. Sanders died in Spain in 1972 at 65. Addison DeWitt survives forever as a man who seems able to control every room he enters. The actor who created him discovered that real life offered no perfectly written line capable of controlling grief, loneliness, or a body gradually giving way. Number 10. Gene Simmons. At first glance, Gene Simmons seems like the wrong person for a story about destructive drinking. Her screen image was elegance itself. She moved from British classics such as Great Expectations, Black Narcissus, and Hamlet into major Hollywood productions including Guys and Dolls, Spartacus, Elmer Gantry, and The Big Country. Audiences saw intelligence, grace, and discipline. Behind that image, her life became increasingly difficult. The breakdown of her marriage to director Richard Brooks coincided with career frustration and a growing dependence on alcohol. During the 1970s, the industry was changing, and actresses entering middle age often found substantial roles disappearing. Simmons drank more heavily as personal and professional pressures accumulated. Eventually, she recognized that the problem could no longer be managed privately and entered treatment at the Betty Ford Center. That decision altered the direction of her life. Instead of moving toward the tragic ending experienced by several others in this countdown, Simmons recovered. Television then gave her another major opportunity in The Thornbirds, and she won an Emmy. She continued working for years afterward, proving that addiction had damaged her life without erasing the talent underneath it. Her story is therefore not one of complete destruction, but of something nearly lost and then reclaimed. Classic Hollywood loved manufactured comeback stories. Gene Simmons lived a genuine one, and the years she gained afterward became the strongest argument for seeking help before the damage became irreversible. Number 11. Tony Hancock. Comedy made Tony Hancock famous, but laughter never quieted the doubts inside him. At the height of his popularity, Hancock's Half Hour was one of the defining programs of British entertainment. His character was pompous, frustrated, insecure, and convinced he deserved more from life than life seemed willing to provide. The joke worked because Hancock understood those feelings intimately. Success did not make him confident, it made him frightened of losing success. He worried constantly about scripts, reviews, status, and whether audiences considered him a serious artist. Alcohol gradually moved from social habit to serious dependency. As drinking increased, the precision required for comedy began suffering. Timing became less reliable, memorizing material became harder, and professional relationships fractured. Hancock separated from writers Ray Galton and Alan Simpson and ended his famous partnership with Sid James. Decisions that removed important creative support from around him. Attempts to reinvent himself brought uneven results. The public still loved the familiar Hancock persona, but the man behind it increasingly struggled with depression and self-doubt. He entered clinics and attempted to stop drinking, yet periods of improvement did not last. Eventually, he traveled to Australia, hoping a new television series might provide another beginning. His life ended there in 1968 at only 44. The surviving recordings remain brilliantly funny, which makes the story even more painful. Audiences were laughing at perfectly constructed misery, while the performer creating it was living through something frighteningly real. Number 12. Mary Ure. The future once looked almost limitless for Mary Ure. The Scottish actress emerged from the theatre with the kind of reputation that made critics expect greatness. Her work in Look Back in Anger connected her to the new movement transforming British drama, and Sons and Lovers brought an Academy Award nomination. Major films followed, including Where Eagles Dare opposite Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood. Yet the career never developed in the way those early achievements suggested. Behind the scenes, Ure struggled emotionally, and alcohol became increasingly destructive. Her marriage to Robert Shaw was passionate and complicated. Both performers worked intensely, and both had difficult relationships with drinking. As Ure's dependence worsened, professional reliability became a problem. Theatre should have offered a place to rebuild, but even there the damage became visible. During the 1970s, she lost important stage opportunities as her condition deteriorated. Then, in April 1975, another chance appeared. Ure returned to the London stage in The Exorcism. The opening performance was received positively and seemed to suggest the possibility of a comeback. Within hours, she became critically ill after a dangerous combination of alcohol and medication. She died at 42. The timing makes the story especially cruel. Ure did not disappear decades after her best work. She died at an age when many actresses are entering their richest period. Where Eagles Dare remains endlessly rewatched, preserving a composed screen presence that gives little indication of how serious her private struggle had become. Number 13. Trevor Howard. Nothing about Trevor Howard's most famous performance suggested excess. In Brief Encounter, he played Dr. Alec Harvey with extraordinary restraint, allowing every glance and pause to carry emotion. That image helped establish him as one of Britain's most respected actors. Away from the camera, Howard's relationship with alcohol was considerably less restrained. He belonged to a theatrical generation in which heavy drinking was often treated as a badge of toughness. Actors finished performances, headed to pubs, stayed late, and somehow appeared for work again the following day. Howard became famous for fitting that tradition. What protected him professionally was reliability. Despite his drinking, he usually arrived, knew what he was doing, and delivered. That allowed him to build an enormous filmography, including The Third Man, Sons and Lovers, Mutiny on the Bounty, The Charge of the Light Brigade, Ryan's Daughter, Superman, and Gandhi. But remaining functional did not mean remaining unharmed. By his later years, alcoholism had become a serious health issue. During production of White Mischief in Kenya, Howard was already physically weakened, yet he continued working because acting remained central to his identity. He died in 1988 at 71. There was no spectacular firing or sudden career collapse. Instead, alcohol accompanied him for decades while the physical cost accumulated. His story shows why judging addiction only by whether someone can still perform is misleading. Trevor Howard could continue performing long after his body had begun paying for the lifestyle that surrounded the work. Number 14. Hugh Griffith. Winning an Oscar should have opened every important door for Hugh Griffith, and for a while it did. His performance as Sheikh Ilderim in Ben-Hur was funny, theatrical, proud, and impossible to overlook, even inside one of Hollywood's largest spectacles. The Welsh actor soon appeared in Exodus, Tom Jones, How to Steal a Million, Oliver, and other prestigious productions. His expressive face and booming personality made him ideal for colorful character roles. Producers, however, also became familiar with his chronic alcoholism. Stories of Griffith drinking heavily during productions became part of his professional reputation. The situation was especially frustrating because the talent did not disappear. When focused, he could still dominate a scene. Hollywood can forgive extraordinary behavior for a while when an actor remains valuable, but large productions eventually require reliability as much as brilliance. As Griffith's drinking worsened, the balance changed. Important opportunities became less consistent, his physical health suffered, and the career failed to build on the promise of an Academy Award in the way many observers expected. He continued acting, sometimes giving memorable performances, but the gap between what he could do and what producers could safely build around him widened. Griffith died in 1980 at 67. The colorful anecdotes about hard-drinking actors can sound amusing decades later, yet behind them were missed roles, worried colleagues, damaged health, and professional risks. The Oscar proved Hollywood had not exaggerated Hugh Griffith's ability. His drinking helped prevent that ability from producing the uninterrupted career it deserved. Number 15. Dennis Price. A perfectly controlled voice made Dennis Price sound as though chaos could never touch him. That quality was essential to Kind Hearts and Coronets, where his calm performance as Louis Mazzini anchors increasingly outrageous events. The film established Price as one of British cinema's most sophisticated leading men. His real life became far less controlled. He struggled with depression, financial problems, gambling, and alcoholism, a combination that gradually undermined both his stability and career. During the early 1950s, Price had been handsome enough for romantic leads and skilled enough for demanding comedy. By the following decade, his position in the industry had weakened significantly. Bankruptcy arrived in 1967. The decline did not remove his talent, but it changed the kind of work available. Instead of carefully selected prestige roles, Price increasingly accepted television, low-budget horror pictures, supporting parts, and international productions simply to keep working. Audiences could still hear the elegant voice and see flashes of the effortless performer from his best years, but the career had clearly changed direction. Alcoholism worsened during his later life, especially as professional and financial difficulties accumulated. Price eventually spent much of his time away from the glamorous circles associated with his youth. He died in Guernsey in 1973, at 58. Watching Kind Hearts and Coronets today makes the contrast startling. Price appears utterly confident, almost untouchable. The screen preserved that sophistication permanently, while the man behind it spent years struggling to preserve basic stability. Number 16. John Le Mesurier. Nobody looked more naturally relaxed on television than John Le Mesurier. His sleepy voice and mild bewilderment made Sergeant Wilson in Dad's Army the perfect contrast to Captain Mainwaring's explosive importance. Long before that series, however, Le Mesurier had already built an enormous career as a British character actor. His dry delivery made him useful in comedy, crime, war films, and television. Heavy drinking existed alongside that professional life for years. Unlike performers whose intoxication created public scandals, Le Mesurier largely remained functional. He arrived for work, knew his lines, and rarely gave producers a reason to fear obvious chaos. That made the underlying problem easier to ignore. During the late 1970s, his body finally delivered a warning that could not be dismissed. A collapse while working in Australia led to a diagnosis of cirrhosis, and doctors told him to stop drinking. For a period he did. Later accounts describe him cautiously returning to beer while avoiding spirits, but decades of physical damage could not simply be erased. Le Mesurier died in 1983 at 71 after a stomach hemorrhage connected with complications from liver disease. His case lacks the sensational public collapse associated with Oliver Reed or Tony Hancock. That is exactly why it matters. Addiction can exist behind punctuality, charm, employment, and a calm public face. The entertainment industry often judged drinking by whether someone could still work. John Le Mesurier could work. His body nevertheless absorbed the consequences year after year until it could not absorb them anymore. Number 17. Carol White. Almost overnight, Carol White became the face of ordinary working-class struggle. When Cathy Come Home aired in 1966, millions watched her character move through homelessness and institutional indifference, and the television drama created national debate. Ken Loach then cast her in Poor Cow, strengthening her reputation as one of Britain's most natural young actresses. Hollywood noticed. White was compared with Julie Christie and appeared positioned for major international stardom. Instead, fame arrived alongside personal chaos. Alcohol and drugs became increasingly serious problems, relationships were unstable, and the pressure of working internationally added another layer. Her career began losing momentum almost as quickly as it had gained it. There were still strong performances. The squeeze showed that she could remain emotionally powerful on screen, but opportunities were no longer arriving with the same frequency or prestige. By the 1980s, the actress once expected to become one of Britain's biggest exports had largely disappeared from important cinema. White died in Florida in 1991, at only 48. Accounts of her final medical circumstances have sometimes differed, so alcohol should not be presented as one simple explanation for everything that happened. What is clear is that alcoholism seriously damaged her health and professional stability. The saddest part is the speed of the fall. She rose rapidly, seemed ready for enormous things, and then watched the machinery of fame move on. The young woman who had represented a new British realism became one of its most painful lost opportunities. Number 18. Rachel Roberts. Raw emotion made Rachel Roberts almost impossible to ignore. In Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, she was funny, wounded, desperate, and completely believable. In This Sporting Life, opposite Richard Harris, she produced another performance of extraordinary emotional force. Awards and international recognition followed, suggesting a long career at the highest level. Privately, Roberts struggled with intense insecurity and a turbulent personal life. Her marriage to Rex Harrison became central to her identity. The relationship was passionate, difficult, and heavily affected by drinking. When it ended, Roberts found the separation extremely hard to accept, and alcohol and depression worsened. She continued acting, which made the seriousness of the problem less obvious to audiences. Murder on the Orient Express, Picnic at Hanging Rock, Yanks, stage appearances, and television work proved that her talent remained intact. Stability behind the performances did not. Her life in Hollywood became increasingly lonely, while friends worried about the direction in which she was moving. Professional success could provide temporary structure, but could not repair the emotional collapse she associated with the end of her marriage. Roberts died in Los Angeles in 1980, at 53, after a toxic combination of substances. Alcohol was only part of a wider struggle involving depression, grief, and emotional dependency, but it had become a destructive force in her later life. The tragedy is that Roberts could transform pain into remarkable art for audiences, while finding it much harder to make her own pain survivable. Number 19. Peter Cook. Comedians who worked with Peter Cook often described the same frustrating experience. He could say something casually in conversation that was funnier than material other writers might spend a week developing. His mind seemed naturally designed for satire. Beyond the fringe changed British comedy, the Establishment Club became a cultural landmark. Private Eye benefited from his support, and his partnership with Dudley Moore produced Not Only, But Also, and Bedazzled. Cook had influenced an entire generation before reaching middle age. Then the momentum slowed. Some of that was personality. He never displayed the relentless ambition expected of someone with his ability, and sometimes appeared more interested in entertaining friends than building a carefully planned career. Heavy drinking increasingly complicated matters. As Dudley Moore developed a successful Hollywood career, Cook's output became less consistent. Friends watched enormous comic intelligence disappear into long periods of drinking, inactivity, and missed possibilities. Yet the gift never vanished. Cook could suddenly return with an improvised character or television appearance that reminded everybody why he had once seemed almost frighteningly talented. That made the lost years more frustrating. He died in 1995 at 57 after a gastrointestinal hemorrhage, following years in which heavy drinking had harmed his health. Cook produced enough brilliant work to guarantee his place in comedy history. Still, people who knew his abilities remained convinced audiences received only part of what might have existed. Alcohol did not erase the masterpieces, it helped create empty spaces around them. Number 20. Graham Chapman. Trying to play King Arthur while suffering serious alcohol withdrawal sounds like the setup to a Monty Python sketch. For Graham Chapman, during Monty Python and the Holy Grail, it was painfully real. Chapman had used alcohol for years to manage anxiety, social discomfort, and performance pressure. Gradually, drinking changed from something that seemed helpful into something his body expected. Python depended on timing, memory, improvisation, and the ability to move quickly between absurd ideas. Dependency threatened all of those things. The remote Scottish locations used for Holy Grail made matters worse because Chapman could not maintain his usual drinking pattern, and withdrawal symptoms affected him during filming. For his colleagues, the situation was frightening. They knew him as a trained doctor, intelligent writer, and one of the group's strongest straight performers. Watching him struggle made the danger impossible to dismiss. Eventually, Chapman stopped drinking. Before Life of Brian, he achieved sobriety, and the difference was dramatic. His performance as Brian is controlled, sympathetic, energetic, and extremely funny. The man who had physically struggled through parts of Holy Grail seemed fully present again. Chapman remained sober for the rest of his life. Cancer, not alcohol, caused his death in 1989 at 48. His story belongs here because the destruction was real, even though he escaped it. Alcohol threatened his health and one of comedy's most important creative partnerships. Recovery gave him another decade of work and proved that decline did not have to become destiny. Number 21. David Hemmings. For a brief period in the 1960s, David Hemmings looked like the face of modern Britain. Michelangelo Antonioni's blow-up placed him in fashionable London, surrounded by models, photography, music, sports cars, and moral confusion. The film became an international sensation, and Hemmings suddenly represented swinging London itself. Roles in Camelot, Barbarella, The Charge of the Light Brigade, and Alfred the Great followed. Yet the conventional leading man career gradually lost momentum. Part of that was intentional because Hemmings became increasingly interested in directing and producing. Alcohol, however, also became a serious problem. By the 1980s, his drinking had become severe enough that he sought treatment at the Betty Ford Center. The glamorous freedom associated with his youth had turned into dependency. Hemmings eventually recovered sufficiently to rebuild his life and, unexpectedly, his acting career. Ridley Scott cast him in Gladiator as Cassius, the master of ceremonies inside the Colosseum. The role was not large, but his distinctive voice and face immediately attracted attention. More work followed in Gangs of New York, Spy Game, Last Orders, and other productions. It became a genuine late-career revival. Hemmings died from a heart attack in 2003 while working in Romania at 62. Alcohol had damaged important years, but unlike many names on this list, he lived long enough to return to major productions and discover that filmmakers had not forgotten what made him compelling in the first place. Number 22. Charles Hawtrey. Nothing about Charles Hawtrey looked conventional, which was exactly why audiences loved him. His thin frame, enormous glasses, high voice, and strange manner made him one of the most recognizable members of the Carry On company. Whenever Hawtrey entered a scene, viewers expected something eccentric. The films turned him into a household name, but his private life was far less cheerful. Hawtrey drank extremely heavily, and as the years passed, alcohol increasingly affected his behavior, relationships, and professional reliability. The Carry On producers tolerated plenty of eccentricity because the movies were made quickly and cheaply, but Hawtrey became more difficult to manage. Arguments over billing, money, and status added to the tension. By Carry On Abroad in 1972, his long relationship with the series was effectively over. He never returned to the main films. After leaving the franchise, substantial acting opportunities became rare. The performer, once instantly recognizable across Britain, gradually withdrew into a smaller and more isolated life. Stories from his later years describe continued heavy drinking and worsening health. Hawtrey died in 1988 at 73. Watching the Carry On pictures today, he seems almost weightless, bouncing through scenes and giving every situation an extra layer of absurdity. Knowing the private history changes that image. The laughter was real, but so was the loneliness behind it. Alcohol did not erase Hawtrey from popular culture, yet it contributed to making his final decades look nothing like the colorful world audiences associated with him. Number 23. Robert Stephens. British theatre once expected Robert Stephens to become one of its permanent giants. Laurence Olivier admired him, the National Theatre gave him major responsibilities, and critics saw the potential for a career beside the greatest classical actors of the period. Stephens possessed intelligence, danger, humour, and a voice capable of filling a theatre. Then, his life began breaking apart. His marriage to Maggie Smith deteriorated, emotional problems intensified, and heavy drinking became increasingly destructive. Professional confidence disappeared. For an actor whose early career had appeared aimed directly toward greatness, the collapse was dramatic. Stephens withdrew from major theatrical work and entered periods when his employment no longer matched his reputation. Alcohol and depression fed each other, making the disciplined routine required by classical acting increasingly difficult. Yet his story contains one of the strongest recoveries on this list. Years later, the Royal Shakespeare Company welcomed him back into roles worthy of his ability. His full staff was acclaimed, and King Lear finally placed him again at the center of Shakespearean attention. Stephens received a knighthood shortly before his death in 1995. The honor could not return the lost years, but it proved that the talent had survived beneath them. Alcohol had nearly transformed a future theatrical legend into a cautionary footnote. His late revival allowed audiences to see the actor critics had predicted decades earlier, making the long middle period of instability seem even more frustrating. He had not lost the gift. For years, he had lost the stability required to use it consistently. Number 24. Tom Conway. Hollywood loved Tom Conway's smooth, slightly amused voice, and there was a reason audiences sometimes felt they had heard something similar before. His younger brother was George Sanders. Conway became a star in his own right during the 1940s, taking over the Falcon detective series and appearing in atmospheric Val Lewton productions including Cat People, I Walked with a Zombie, and The Seventh Victim. His polished manner made him ideal for mysteries and sophisticated dramas. Then alcoholism began dismantling the career. Drinking damaged his marriage and professional reliability, while a drunk driving incident brought public embarrassment. As the 1950s continued, important roles became harder to obtain, money disappeared and health weakened. Even Sanders reportedly reached a point where watching his brother's decline became difficult. The contrast between their careers was painful. Both had entered Hollywood as elegant British performers with nearly identical voices. Sanders won an Oscar and retained international recognition, while Conway moved steadily toward financial hardship. In later years, he required assistance and suffered serious medical problems. He died in 1967 at 62 with liver disease, among the conditions associated with his final decline. The story sounds almost written for a melodrama. Two brothers arrive in Hollywood with similar gifts and opportunities, yet their lives move in dramatically different directions. Tom Conway's films survive, especially among classic horror fans, but many viewers who recognize his face have no idea how thoroughly alcohol helped dismantle the security created during his successful years. Number 25. Susan Shaw. A bright smile once made Susan Shaw look exactly like the sort of young actress post-war British cinema wanted. The Rank organization promoted her, and she appeared in an impressive group of films, including It Always Rains on Sunday, London Belongs to Me, Pool of London, The Good Die Young, and Carry On Nurse. Her career seemed stable until personal tragedy altered everything. Shaw married actor Bonar Colliano, another familiar face in British films. In 1958, he died following a road accident. She was devastated, and grief gradually became connected with increasingly serious drinking. The professional consequences were severe. Shaw's acting work became less consistent, financial problems grew, and the glamorous world she had known receded. Eventually, acting could no longer provide enough stability, and she took other work to survive. By her final years, the former Rank star was living with very little money in Soho. She died in 1978 at only 49 from cirrhosis of the liver. Then came a final detail that seemed to summarize the entire rise and fall: the Rank organization, the company that had once promoted her as a promising young actress, reportedly helped pay for her funeral. That is the sort of ending studio publicity never placed in fan magazines. A company could introduce an actress to the public, photograph her beautifully, and make her temporarily famous. It could not protect her from grief. Once alcohol became Shaw's way of coping with that grief, the glamorous career disappeared frighteningly quickly. Number 26. Eutha Joyce. Mildred Roper wanted romance, attention, sophistication, and excitement. Her husband George generally wanted to avoid all four. That simple conflict turned George and Mildred into one of Britain's most popular television comedies and made Eutha Joyce a household name. Her comic timing was extraordinary. One expression could deliver an entire joke. Behind the camera, however, Joyce worried that the character making her famous might also trap her forever. Typecasting frightened her. Would producers see Eutha Joyce after the series ended, or only Mildred in leopard print clothing? Those fears existed beside growing loneliness, and alcohol gradually became a central problem. Friends noticed the amount she was drinking and became increasingly concerned. Yet public success made the seriousness easy to miss. George and Mildred remained enormously popular, and a feature film followed. To viewers, Joyce still looked sharp and completely in command. Her body told another story. In 1980, she was admitted to hospital and died shortly afterward at 53 from liver failure associated with long-term alcoholism. The news shocked audiences because there had been little public warning. The woman they had watched, delivering perfectly timed insults only months earlier, was gone. Joyce's story reveals the cruel side of being identified forever with one beloved role. To audiences, that sounds like success. To a performer, it can create fear that no second act exists. Alcohol did not create all of her unhappiness, but it became the method she increasingly used to cope with it. Number 27. Michael Elphick. Michael Elphick looked tough even when he smiled. His weathered face and gravelly voice made him ideal for characters who seemed to have lived complicated lives before the story even began. Film audiences saw him in The Elephant Man, Quadrophenia, Gorky Park, and other productions, while television made him especially famous through Boone. Privately, alcohol became a severe problem. Elphick later spoke about consuming extraordinary quantities of spirits, and what may once have been heavy social drinking developed into dependency serious enough to require treatment. He entered the Priory in an attempt to regain control. Recovery was uneven. There were periods of improvement and periods when drinking returned. As Elphick aged, the effects became harder to hide professionally. During his time on EastEnders, concern about his drinking became part of the discussion surrounding his work, raising questions about reliability. For an actor who had received major recognition and successfully led a television series, the change was striking. He continued working and remained respected by many colleagues, but years of alcohol abuse placed enormous pressure on his health. Elphick died in 2002, shortly before his 56th birthday, after suffering a heart attack. Long-term drinking had contributed to his physical decline. The tough guy image became painfully ironic. He spent decades playing men capable of facing criminals, danger, and hardship, yet the most persistent threat in his own life was something ordinary, legal, and available almost everywhere. Unlike a television storyline, there was no final episode in which everything could be neatly repaired before the credits. Number 28. Joan Sims. Without Joan Sims, the Carry On films would have felt completely different. She could play romantic frustration, upper-class outrage, working-class exhaustion, jealousy, embarrassment, and total chaos, often within the same film. Whatever absurd situation appeared in the script, Sims understood exactly how far to push it. Her professional life seemed crowded with people. Her later private life became increasingly lonely. Sims never married, and over time she lost close friends and important companions. As familiar members of the Carry On company died, parts of the social world that had surrounded her for decades disappeared. Depression became more serious, and so did drinking. Alcohol was never the public identity associated with Joan Sims, which made the decline easier for viewers to overlook. She continued working and could still produce excellent performances. Her appearance opposite Judi Dench in The Last of the Blonde Bombshells reminded audiences that the comic and dramatic instincts had not vanished. Doctors eventually recommended rehabilitation for her drinking, but Sims declined. Her health continued deteriorating. After surgery in 2000, complications left her increasingly weak, and she died in 2001 at 71. Liver failure was among the medical conditions recorded around her death. The difference between screen and private life is difficult to ignore. In the films, Sims was surrounded by noise, arguments, laughter, and familiar faces. Later years became quieter and more isolated. Alcohol filled part of that silence. Her story is less about sudden career destruction than loneliness gradually damaging someone audiences believed they knew because she had made them laugh for so long. Number 29. Dora Bryan. Dora Bryan could make an audience laugh before she finished entering a room. Small, energetic, and wonderfully expressive, she seemed naturally suited to comedy. Then, A Taste of Honey demonstrated the dramatic power underneath the comic personality and earned her a BAFTA. Few viewers knew how difficult parts of her private life had become. Bryan endured miscarriages and periods of depression. Like many performers of her generation, she came from a culture where emotional distress was often hidden behind work, humor, and drinking. By the late 1970s, alcohol dependency had become serious enough that she needed help. Bryan sought it. She attended Alcoholics Anonymous and began rebuilding her life. That decision makes her story dramatically different from several others in this countdown. Recovery worked. Her career continued for decades. Bryan returned repeatedly to theater and television, maintaining the warmth and comic timing audiences loved. Younger viewers later discovered her through appearances in programs including Absolutely Fabulous, and she eventually received an OBE for services to drama. Bryan lived until 91, dying in 2014. Consider what that recovery gave her: decades of additional work, relationships, performances, and ordinary life. Had drinking continued at the same level, her story could have ended much earlier. Entertainment history loves spectacular destruction because tragedy produces memorable headlines. Dora Bryan offers something more valuable. She demonstrates that acknowledging dependency did not mean surrendering a career. For her, accepting help was not the final chapter. It was the reason so many later chapters existed at all. Number 30. Wilfrid Lawson. The image of the hard-drinking British actor existed long before Richard Burton, Peter O'Toole, and Oliver Reed turned it into popular mythology. Wilfrid Lawson belonged to an earlier generation. Born in Yorkshire, he developed into a powerful stage and film character actor capable of handling Shakespeare, drama, and eccentric comedy. American audiences saw him opposite John Wayne in The Long Voyage Home, while British cinema used his distinctive face and voice across decades. Alcoholism eventually interfered seriously with reliability. During the 1950s, Lawson's career declined. Substantial roles became less frequent, and some appearances were reduced to small or uncredited work. This is the form professional collapse often takes outside sensational headlines. A major role becomes a supporting role. A supporting role becomes one scene. The scene becomes an appearance barely noticed in the credits. Eventually, producers stop calling. Lawson managed to reverse part of that decline. During the 1960s, filmmakers rediscovered his unusual presence, and productions including Tom Jones and The Wrong Box gave him memorable late opportunities. The recovery proved that the talent had survived, but years of instability had already changed the shape of his career. Lawson died in 1966 at 66. Viewers encountering his strongest performances today may wonder why someone so distinctive was not better known. There is no single answer, yet alcohol forms an important part of it. Long before newspapers celebrated later generations of British hellraisers, Wilfrid Lawson had already experienced the much less entertaining professional consequences of that lifestyle. Number 31. Ronald Fraser. Some actors looked as though they belonged naturally inside a pub, and Ronald Fraser was one of them. His mischievous face made him perfect for soldiers, criminals, irresponsible aristocrats, adventurers, and cheerful rogues. The screen image was not entirely invented. Fraser became well known around London's West End for heavy drinking, and the lifestyle was often treated affectionately because he remained charming and continued working. That ability to keep functioning can hide how serious dependency has become. Fraser accumulated an impressive list of credits, including The Flight of the Phoenix, The Killing of Sister George, The Wild Geese, Swallows and Amazons, Scandal, and numerous television appearances. Directors kept hiring him because his personality was distinctive. Even a small role could remain memorable, but the same drinking that contributed to his off-screen legend placed continuing pressure on his health. As Fraser grew older, that pressure became harder to ignore. He died in 1997 at 66 after suffering a hemorrhage. His story lacks the spectacular professional collapse found elsewhere in this list, yet that makes it revealing. Roles can continue, paychecks can continue, and friends can continue laughing at drinking stories, while physical damage quietly accumulates. Fraser's public image even benefited from being viewed as a larger-than-life drinker. The danger is that a reputation can make destructive behavior look entertaining long after it has stopped being entertaining for the person living through it. Number 32. Patrick Magee. Some voices sound threatening before they say anything threatening. Patrick Magee had one of those voices. Deep, rough, and strangely musical, it made him ideal for Samuel Beckett's theatre and for filmmakers who needed an actor capable of bringing menace into a room. Stanley Kubrick used him memorably in A Clockwork Orange and Barry Lyndon, while Roger Corman cast him in The Mask of the Red Death. Magee's presence felt intense even in silence. Away from the stage and camera, heavy drinking became a long-standing part of his life. The theatrical culture surrounding performers of his generation often treated alcohol as routine. A performance ended, the company went to the pub, arguments about theatre and politics continued late into the night, and everyone was expected to appear again the next day. For younger actors, that lifestyle could look romantic. For bodies living through it year after year, the reality was different. Magee continued working, which allowed drinking to become part of his legend instead of immediately ending his career. As he aged, however, his health weakened. He died in London in 1982 at 60 after a heart attack. Alcohol cannot fairly be described as the sole cause, but heavy drinking remained part of his lifestyle for years. The colorful mythology of the theatrical drinker rarely includes exhaustion, medical consequences, or the possibility that decades of additional performances may be lost when the body finally refuses to cooperate. Number 33. Nicol Williamson. At his best, Nicol Williamson did not seem to perform Shakespeare. He attacked it. Critics watched his Hamlet and wondered whether they were seeing one of the greatest actors of his generation. His voice could become tender one moment and explosive the next, and directors recognized enormous potential. Unfortunately, unpredictability also followed him away from the stage. Williamson developed a reputation for arguments, confrontations, volatility, and serious drinking. Some stories inevitably grew larger in the retelling, but the underlying problem was genuine. Alcohol did not remove his talent. The difficulty was consistency. Major theatre and film careers depend on producers, directors, companies, and insurers trusting that a performer can deliver repeatedly. A reputation for instability slowly makes that trust harder to maintain. Williamson still produced memorable work. His Merlin in Excalibur became one of his best-known screen roles, while The 7% Solution, Robin and Marian, and other productions demonstrated his remarkable presence. Yet the career never became the uninterrupted sequence of major classical roles many critics had predicted. He later withdrew significantly from acting and died from cancer in 2011. By then, younger audiences often knew individual films more readily than the theatrical legends surrounding him. That creates a painful question. How many great Lears, Macbeths, stage triumphs, or prestige films might Williamson have added with a more stable professional life? The surviving performances prove the ability. The gaps in the career show what instability can cost even someone with exceptional gifts. Number 34. Alan Lake. Before his private life became inseparable from Diana Dors, Alan Lake looked capable of building a substantial British screen career. He was handsome without seeming polished and could shift easily between charm and danger, qualities well suited to the tougher cinema of the late 1960s and 1970s. Then, physical injury changed the direction of his life. In 1972, Lake suffered a serious horse riding accident and broke his back. Pain became a constant presence, acting became more difficult, and drinking increased dramatically. Diana Dors later described how alcohol could transform his personality, turning the man she knew into someone angry and unpredictable. That instability affected family life and professional possibilities. Lake did achieve periods when his drinking improved, but the career momentum had already weakened. Then Dors developed cancer. Her illness and death in 1984 removed the person at the center of Lake's emotional world. His own life ended only months later at 43. Alcohol cannot explain everything that happened. Chronic pain, grief, depression, and career frustration all mattered, but drinking became one of the destructive mechanisms through which those problems intensified. Old photographs reveal the lost possibility clearly. Lake had the face and presence to age naturally into character roles, especially in British television and crime drama. Instead, his career stopped before middle age had properly begun. The drinking did not create every wound, but it repeatedly made existing wounds harder to survive. Number 35. Sarah Churchill. Having the surname Churchill meant Sarah Churchill entered every room carrying history with her. As Winston Churchill's daughter, she received attention before audiences had judged her talent. Yet Sarah wanted a performing career of her own. She danced, acted, and eventually reached Hollywood, where her most famous opportunity came opposite Fred Astaire in Royal Wedding. On screen, she appeared elegant, controlled, and perfectly suited to MGM polish. Behind that image, drinking became increasingly serious. By the 1950s, alcohol was producing public consequences, and incidents attracted greater attention precisely because of her famous family. Legal difficulties and embarrassing headlines followed. Churchill later acknowledged her struggle with alcoholism. The problem damaged the stability of both her private life and professional career. Her film work never developed into the sustained international success that Royal Wedding seemed capable of launching, although she continued performing, especially on stage. Her story demonstrates how little protection privilege can provide once dependency becomes serious. She had access to money, powerful people, respected family connections, and social circles unavailable to most performers. None of those advantages made alcohol less damaging. In some ways, fame added pressure, because mistakes could not remain private. Churchill died in 1982 at 67. Movie fans still remember the graceful woman dancing beside Fred Astaire. That image remains frozen inside MGM perfection, while the difficult years that followed existed outside the carefully lit frame. Number 36. Hay Petrie. Most viewers do not know Hay Petrie's name, but classic British film fans often know his face. That was the strange existence of a successful character actor. Petrie appeared as eccentric old men, servants, officials, comic figures, and unusual supporting characters in films including Jamaica Inn, The Ghost Goes West, The Old Curiosity Shop, and David Lean's Great Expectations. He could appear briefly and still leave an impression. Character performers, however, rarely received the money or protection associated with leading stars. They moved between theatre and film and depended on staying employable. For Petrie, alcoholism became an additional burden inside that uncertain professional life. His drinking never produced the spectacular newspaper stories attached to Burton or Reed, which is exactly why his case deserves attention. Entertainment history tends to remember addiction when a famous person behaves publicly, yet many working performers faced similar struggles without headlines. Petrie continued acting despite alcoholism, but his health and stability deteriorated. He died in London in 1948, at only 53, just as British cinema was entering an important post-war period. Had he lived longer, his distinctive appearance almost certainly would have kept him busy. Instead, his career survives mainly through supporting performances. Alcohol's impact on cinema was never limited to glamorous leading men. For every star photographed leaving a nightclub, there were dependable character actors quietly fighting similar problems, while audiences barely knew their names. Number 37. Patrick Troughton. Replacing the original Doctor Who looked almost impossible. Patrick Troughton made it work so completely that the idea of regeneration became one of television's greatest storytelling devices. His second Doctor was playful, mysterious, intelligent, and unpredictable, and the success protected the series for generations. Troughton then worked relentlessly across British television and film. Away from the screen, he maintained habits that placed considerable strain on his health, including heavy smoking and drinking within a demanding professional routine. Heart problems eventually became impossible to ignore. He suffered serious cardiac episodes and received medical warnings to reduce stress and change aspects of his lifestyle. Yet Troughton continued accepting work and attending conventions because acting and contact with audiences remained important to him. In 1987, while appearing at a Doctor Who convention in the United States, he suffered a fatal heart attack at 67. Alcohol should not be described as the single cause of his death. Smoking, existing heart disease, workload, age, and other factors were crucial. His inclusion instead reflects the broader entertainment culture in which drinking heavily could be normalized even after the body had begun delivering serious warnings. Troughton's career was not destroyed professionally. His reputation actually grew after death. The damage was physical. The man whose character repeatedly escaped danger on television belonged to a generation of performers who often treated their own health warnings as temporary interruptions rather than instructions that demanded permanent change. Number 38. Lawrence Harvey. The cold ambition Lawrence Harvey displayed in Room at the Top made him internationally famous. His character, Joe Lampton, would climb over almost anybody to escape the limits of class, and Harvey's own career seemed to move with similar determination. Born in Lithuania and raised in South Africa before becoming a British star, he eventually appeared in The Alamo, Butterfield 8, Summer and Smoke, and the unforgettable political thriller The Manchurian Candidate. Privately, Harvey developed a reputation for hard living. He smoked heavily, drank heavily, worked constantly, and moved through a demanding social life. At the time, those habits often looked like part of movie star sophistication. Cigarettes and cocktails appeared in publicity photographs as symbols of adulthood rather than warnings. The body eventually provided a harsher interpretation. Harvey developed stomach cancer and continued working while seriously ill. He died in 1973 at only 45. It would be irresponsible to claim that alcohol directly caused his cancer. The historical evidence does not support such a simple statement. His presence on this list is about the cumulative culture of excess surrounding him. A successful actor could drink heavily for years without colleagues treating the behavior as remarkable. The same was true of smoking. Harvey's career never underwent the public collapse experienced by Hancock or Hendry, but his life was frighteningly short. The actor who portrayed relentless ambition had barely reached middle age when the curtain came down permanently. Number 39. Colin Clive. One cry guaranteed Colin Clive a place in movie history. As Henry Frankenstein in James Whale's Frankenstein, his ecstatic reaction when the creature moves created a scene copied and parodied for generations. Boris Karloff became the visual icon, but Clive supplied the dangerous human obsession driving the story. His performance feels nervous, feverish, and unstable, qualities that made him compelling in Journey's End, Christopher Strong, Jane Eyre, Mad Love, and Bride of Frankenstein as well. Behind that intensity was a serious private struggle. Clive suffered from chronic alcoholism, and colleagues recalled occasions when drinking affected his condition during work. Hollywood continued employing him because the emotional quality he brought to tortured characters was difficult to replace. Unfortunately, his physical health deteriorated rapidly. Tuberculosis and other medical problems weakened him, while heavy drinking placed additional strain on an already fragile body. Clive died in Los Angeles in 1937, at only 37. That age changes the way his filmography looks. Audiences are not watching a mature actor near the conclusion of a long career. They are watching someone who should have had several decades ahead. He could have moved through wartime cinema, film noir, television, and later character roles. None of that happened. The monster survived through sequels, remakes, toys, and television. The brilliant young actor who first celebrated bringing it to life did not survive long enough to witness that legacy. Number 40. James Robertson Justice. Few British character actors looked more naturally authoritative than James Robertson Justice. His enormous frame, booming voice, beard, and intimidating confidence made him ideal for doctors, professors, aristocrats, judges, and men accustomed to being obeyed. The Doctor film series turned him into a particularly familiar face, while his career included major British productions across several decades. Off-screen, Justice cultivated an equally large personality. He loved food, drink, expensive interests, politics, animals, and elaborate stories, often living as though ordinary limits applied to other people. Heavy drinking, financial trouble, and strokes eventually followed. He died in 1975 at 68. Justice's story provides a fitting final reminder that alcohol-related decline did not always follow the same pattern. Some stars lost roles, some lost marriages, some developed liver disease, and others remained professionally active, while broader habits contributed to worsening health and finances. On screen, Justice specialized in men who seemed larger than life. Off-screen, he tried to live that way too. The problem with living larger than life is that the human body remains stubbornly ordinary, no matter how famous the person inside it becomes. Behind the premieres, expensive suits, perfect costumes, and polished studio portraits were real people carrying pressures audiences rarely saw. Alcohol damaged careers, bodies, marriages, friendships, finances, and futures. But several stars also proved recovery was possible. Their stories make the golden age look far less simple than studio publicity suggested. Which name surprised you most? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe for more forgotten classic Hollywood history, and share this video with another fan who loves discovering what happened after the cameras stopped.